Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Welcome to tonight's special episode. Now, when I started this show 8 years ago, this month, I had no idea how successful it would become. At the time, I was a struggling writer, and I simply wanted an artistic outlet. An outlet that actually allowed me to not only see results, but reap the fruits of my labor. Script writing simply didn't fulfill that need. So in other words, I was looking for a new hobby. A hobby that might make use of this lifelong obsession with the strange and unusual. But despite the odds, here we are today, a couple weeks shy of 8 years, and still going strong. Now, I bring all this up because when I started the show, there were a few things I knew that I wanted to feature. I knew I wanted folks to tell their stories in their own words, and hopefully their own voice. That much I did know. I also knew I wanted to pay homage to the programs that came before mine. Your In Search Ofs, your Unsolved Mysteries, Sightings, the Art Bells and Long John Nebels of this existence. And having been born and raised in the middle of nowhere, I knew I wanted to highlight small town legends and stories. The ones that seem to slip through the cracks. The kind that seldom make it to books, podcasts, or television. Because everywhere I've lived, there were these local legends. Spooky places that only folks in town knew about, and places that are only spoke about in front of a fire or a lantern's glow. A haunted bridge, a tree possessed by the devil, a rumored saucer crash, or a creature out by the reservoir. Around here we call them hometown legends, and over the years I've gotten pretty good at collecting them. Which leads us to this evening. I have something special in store for you tonight. Another installment of that ongoing series. An episode chock full of stories and tales from the far-off corners of not only the US of A, but all around the planet. Stories that most have never even heard of, myself included. So to celebrate the end of this, your 16th season of Monsters Among Us, I present to you your Hometown Legend season finale. Now, before we get started, just a quick warning. Hometown legends by nature often involve tragedy of one sort or another. So we will be discussing murder, suicide, and other touchy subjects throughout this episode. So let that be your warning. Now, as not to delay us any further, let's get this sucker started. And to kick us off, we venture to a small town on a big river. A mere hour from my birthplace and boyhood home. Mike, from Ohio. Please share with us your hometown legend.
Hi, this is Mike in Ohio. I'm not sure where this fits into the grand scheme of your show, but I enjoy Monsters Among Us, and I guess I just really wanted to contribute to the show by sharing this phenomenon that happened in my community when I was a kid. This is back in the late 80s in Martins Ferry, Ohio, right along the Ohio River bordering West Virginia in the Ohio Valley. And word spread around the entire valley about a house in Martins Ferry that had this tree in front of it. And when the moon would shine down on it at night, it would cast a shadow on the side of this house. And everyone had a different idea of what the image was on the side of the house. Some said it was the face of a local girl who was kidnapped years earlier, and some said it was a Nazi general from World War II, and others claimed it was a Native American man watching over the area that he used to inhabit. There were just a bunch of different theories. So one night, my mom and her friend decided that we were all going to go see what all the talk was about. We hopped in her car, and we headed up the river to Martins Ferry and found the house with the tree. And when we arrived, there was this small mob around the house, all there to see this shadow. But the woman who owned the house, who owned the home, was on the porch and had the porch light on, which prevented the shadow from being seen on the house. It was making the house bright, and the shadow wasn't able to be seen by the crowd. And she's shouting at the crowd to, like, go home and, like, leave us alone. We're going to call the cops if everyone doesn't leave. And the crowd shouting back to her saying, just turn out the light. And, like, some, like, younger guys, like, I'm going to bring my gun and shoot that light out. And it's just a lot of back and forth continued until my mom decided that nothing that was going to happen there that night was worth staying for. So we got back in the car and we got out of there just to be safe. A few days later, though, my mom shows me a local paper. I can't remember which one it was. There's like 3 papers. There was either the Times Leader, the Intelligencer, or the Wheeling News Register. But in the paper, whichever one it was, I was young, I don't recall, the owners of the house allowed a photographer to snap a photo of the shadow and post it in the paper. And we looked at the picture, and the shadow looked like a young girl with long hair. And it was about as much detail as I remember seeing in the image. It was just like an image of a girl. The talk of it being a Nazi general or a Native American man seemed to be pretty inaccurate from what I was seeing. But it was pretty interesting how detailed the face and the picture looked and the buzz that it created around town. So a couple weeks later, we were in Ferry again, in Martins Ferry. We were there a lot to visit the library. They had a pretty nice library that I spent a lot of time in. And my mom said, let's go check out that house again. She seemed a little curious about it, and I was up for it. I was sure, let's go see the house again. So we went back to that street and pulled up, and the family that lived there had cut the tree down. I remember there was just like a stump or just part of the tree left, and the rest of the tree was gone. And take that for what it's worth. I was pretty young, but like it was definitely cut or severely trimmed. Like there was no leaves left, and no leaves, no shadow. I guess they just had enough. There was so much commotion because of the shadow of this tree cast in their house. They didn't want any part of it. They just got rid of it and all the trouble that it brought them. And I think about that shadow on the tree from time to time and wonder if it was just a coincidence or maybe the image of the girl actually meant something to the family that owned the house. I wonder who the first person was to notice the face of the girl in the shadow, or how word had even spread all over to the point where a small mob had formed on their property that night. I'm going to have to ask my mom about this next time I see her over the holidays. Maybe she remembers a little more than I do. But yeah, that's the weird phenomenon that I experienced as a kid around my hometown. And I guess I just want to know if any similar situations like that might have occurred that could be seen as supernatural, or was it just some weird overhyped coincidence that made a little community get kind of nutty for a short period of time? I don't know. Thanks for taking the call. I really enjoy the show, and have a good one. Thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you, Mike. Now that's what I'm talking about. A ghostly face on the side of a house up in town. That, by definition, to me, is a hometown legend. Now, I'd never heard of this story, despite growing up only about an hour away. But then again, I was only a few years old when this took place, so I likely wouldn't have caught it on the nightly news. But my dad used to drive through that area once a week on his sales/service route. So I asked him about this legend, and he mentioned that he'd heard of it, but was never able to see it. Probably because he was only there during the day. But you know, like Mike mentioned, it was covered in the local paper. And thanks to Delaney, we got our hands on that info. In fact, she managed to pull up a few articles on this mysterious face. And here's the first one, beautifully read by my good friend and fellow adventurer, David Flora.
Martin's Ferry apparition attracts curious crowds. It's too early for Halloween, but dozens of people have been turning up to gaze at an out-of-season apparition gracing a house on Walnut Street. For the past few nights, Joe Burlich of 700.5 Walnut Street has played host to hordes of curious onlookers who show up in his backyard to stare at what they perceive as a stunning likeness of a human face on the side of the two-story home. It's a trip, I'll tell you, Burlich says, hardly concealing his excitement. I mean, have you ever seen anything like that? The face is apparently an illusion cast by the pale glow of a distant mercury light filtering through foliage of a tree, but some of the neighborhoods scoff at skeptics. One man points out the face never moves even when the wind blows the tree. Another says the face may be a sign of some tragedy that occurred on the site years ago.
Now that blurb was taken from a June 25th, 1985 article in the Martins Ferry Times-Leader. And as fun as this story is, it really does sound like pareidolia to me. Now we've covered this visual cue several times, but for those that missed it or aren't familiar, this is the Science Channel's take on how it all works.
It's a strange phenomenon that's evolved over the past few million years, pareidolia, and it happens to everyone. The part of the brain that recognizes faces is called the fusiform gyrus. It can spot a face in just 130 milliseconds. But anything with a face-like arrangement can trigger it too, which can lead to some mistakes. But why does the brain do that? It's an evolutionary survival tactic. If a jogger in the woods happens to see something that looks like the face of a bear, she can run away. But if the jogger didn't see a bear and there was one, she's breakfast.
Now, Mike was right. The tree was cut down. And I have the evidence right here. Mr. Flora, if you don't mind.
The ghostly image appearing on the side of the Francis Burlich home at 700.5 Walnut Street has faded away after the family cut the branches of the two trees Wednesday afternoon. A group of people, most of whom were children, still continued to gather in the alley behind the Burlich home Wednesday night, waiting for the ghost to come out. The image of a human face had been cast on the side of the home Monday and Tuesday night, luring curious onlookers to the Burlich property. Police were called both nights to break up the crowd. The image was apparently caused by the street lights or the moon filtering through the foliage of the tree leaves. Several theories were voiced by onlookers gathered at the site for the past 2 days. The ghost, not to mention the Burlich family, may now rest in peace.
Now that newspaper clipping from the Martins Ferry Time-Leader as well, and it was published on June 27th of 85. So you see, no tree equals no face, and that's one way to deal with it. Well, pareidolia or the paranormal. Either way, this story reminds me of one of my all-time favorite news clips, and one that seems pretty fitting for this time of year. They call it the Crichton Leprechaun. And on March 14th, 2006, it took an Alabama community by storm. And this was the news report that took the internet by storm, just a few short days later. Courtesy of WPMI, NBC News 15, out of Pensacola, Fort Walton.
Curiosity leads to large crowds in Mobile's Crichton community, many of you bringing binoculars, camcorders, even camera phones to take pictures.
To me, it look like a leprechaun to me. All you gotta do is look up in the tree. Who else seen the leprechaun say yeah?
Eyewitnesses say the leprechaun only comes out at night. If you shine a light in its direction, it suddenly disappears.
I just love how excited everyone is in this video. In the extended version, there are even a few guys that suggest looking for the creature's gold. And you know, this is how I imagine Martin's Ferry to be in June of '85. An anxious crowd that's seen something worth getting excited about. What that something is, well, frankly, that's all up to you. Thank you again, Mike, for kicking us off with such a fun story. And a big thanks to David Flora for lending his silky smooth voice. Now be sure to check out one or all of his many podcasts, Hysteria 51, Quiz Quiz Bang Bang, and of course, Blurry Photos Podcast. And at long last, you can catch him and myself in our long awaited documentary film, Shadows in the Desert, High Strangeness in the Borrego Triangle. The film is currently streaming all sorts of places. Go to Apple TV, Amazon Prime, or BorregoTriangle.com to learn more. And if you're a Kickstarter backer, keep an eye on your mailbox. Those rewards are going out in the next couple of days. And keep an eye on your email as well. We'll be sending you a link to view the film shortly, if we haven't already. Now, a huge thank you to everyone that had a helping hand in making this film a possibility. From the crew to the Kickstarter backers, from the locals down in the Triangle, to my friends and family and the folks over at Freestyle. A big thanks to all of you. We worked extremely hard on this picture, so please go check it out. I have a feeling you're going to enjoy it. Now that's enough stumping from me. Let's get back to these hometown legends. Now this next one was sent in by Cassie from my current home of California.
Hi, Derek. I've got one for you for Hometown Legends. My name's Cassie, and in the late 90s, my grandfather had purchased some land and built a house across the street from a graveyard. It was on Parsons Trail in Tahunga, California. It's kind of in the North Valley. The graveyard is Verdugo Cemetery, and they had told me as I lived there that there was a big flood and people were finding bodies in their yard and people were finding glass eyes in their flower beds decades later. It is perched up on a hill, and I heard your call for Hometown Legends and actually found some documents and photos of it. So it is actually true. Finally, after all these years, I've confirmed it. I will send you an email and include a picture of the crypt, the flood, and some news articles. Apparently, they did all slide down the hill, and people were finding freshly buried corpses in their yard for a while. Another episode that happened at the same place was in the late 90s when I lived there. There's a crypt that sits out on the hill, and apparently some goth teenagers broke into the marble faces that covered the crypt, pulled out a few folks, and took some photos with the sunglasses and cigarettes in their mouth, etc. I was unable to find a news article on that, but I know it happened because I could see the graveyard from my kitchen window. I hope that helps for Hometown Legends. That one is definitely confirmed. Have a great one. Thanks.
Thank you, Cassie. Now I've linked to everything that Cassie sent over up in the show notes. In fact, the show notes are filled to the brim with all sorts of information about all of tonight's stories. Be sure to follow along as you listen for the full Monsters Among Us experience. Now, what is it with bodies and coffins floating to the surface on these year-end specials? I swear we have at least one story each finale that discusses that detail. It's almost like it wouldn't be a Hometown Legend episode. without a coffin poking out of the ground. That might be a t-shirt idea. Well, as luck would have it, this isn't the only story I have involving a cemetery to share with you here this evening. There's also this entry from Al, up there in New York.
Hello, this story is for your Hometown Legends episode. My name is Al. I currently live in Ohio, but the story takes place when I lived back in New York State. It's about a very haunted cemetery near Troy, New York, in the town of Brunswick. The cemetery was originally called Forest Park Cemetery, although it's sometimes called Pinewoods Cemetery now. It was established in 1897. It takes up about 20 acres. After initial burials in the late 1800s, it went bankrupt in 1914, then went back into business, if you will, for a while. Went bankrupt again in 1930. Records show about 1,000 people were buried in the cemetery. For many decades, it was mostly abandoned with only one caretaker for a big part of the 1900s. Some of the legends include supposedly being in a Life magazine article as a gateway to hell in one of the most haunted places in the country. I never could find that article in Life. I looked. And that it had a mausoleum where you could see the coffins. It was a gateway to hell and was one of the most haunted places in the country with headless statues. Of course, Satanists used it all the time, but those are some common stories from many cemeteries. My experience was in 1987 when I went there as part of a group of kids in my senior year of high school. It was abandoned still, very overgrown, bushes, knee-high grass, graves and grave markers scattered in between. So that first time we went, there were 6 of us, seniors in high school. We did see the mausoleum with the broken walls. We didn't see coffins, but we did see where the coffins would go. Had a couple beers that first time, acted cool for the girls with us, but that's about it. It wasn't until subsequent trips we started to have some experiences. The second time, my friend and I went back in the summer the following year. It was tough to find a spot where the cops wouldn't be called right away, but we eventually got in there. Had a very much different vibe. We thought we saw shadows. We scared ourselves, fell into a hole, which of course we thought was a grave, but most likely was just where the ground settled. Our first kind of strange visit was the third visit. About a week later, as we were walking through the cemetery at night, we heard crunching sounds. We looked down, and in a rectangular pattern that looked like a grave, all the leaves were curling up as if you were to hold your palm outright and curl your fingers and thumb inward. We, of course, were brave, and we ran screaming from that cemetery again. What was to be the last time we decided to go, we heard a voice come over the radio that said, "Don't go," which was really strange because the tape deck, the radio, had just been removed. And there was none in the car. So we still decided to go. On the way there, the car broke down. So were we saved by the supernatural? Was it just a broken down 1980s Ford Escort with too many miles? There's quite a bit of details online if you look up that cemetery. Love the show. Hope you can use this for your show. Take care.
Come on, man. Not one single coffin poking out of the ground. You're dropping the ball here, Al. But what a great call about a very spooky location. Now, we too searched for the Life magazine article, but with no luck. So if anyone out there happens to have access to that, please do let us know so we can get it to Al. Because I bet he would like to see it. As would I, and it seems lots of other people. People have been looking for this Lifetime article for quite a while, and oddly it's yet to show up. Kind of suspicious, isn't it? Well, anyway, if you are in that area of New York, make a visit. See how it makes you feel. And thank you again, Al, for sharing your hometown legend.
days to a theater.
Have you ever added up the cost of all your subscription services? Let me tell you, you just might be shocked about how much you're paying per year on those subscriptions. Now, when I signed up for Rocket Money, the first thing they showed me was the total amount I was paying for subscriptions per year, and it was way more than I'd realized. The app makes it very easy to see how many subscriptions you're paying for, the cost of each one, and when that next charge will drop. Rocket Money even helped me cancel some of the subscriptions that I no longer wanted. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills. Now, I've never been great at budgeting, but the Rocket Money app makes keeping track of what I spend so easy. It flags frequent spend items, sneaky service fees, and other things I probably would have missed otherwise. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has helped save its members an average of $720 a year, with over 500 million in canceled subscriptions. So stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/Monsters Among Us. That's rocketmoney.com/Monsters Among Us. rocketmoney.com/Monsters Among Us. Now, as always, supporting our sponsors supports the show. So thank you for listening. Now back to that disembodied giggling in the back corner of your basement.
Won't we all be invited to...
Well, we've actually already heard from our next caller this evening, but her first entry was pretty short. That, and she's covering my old stomping grounds. So I'm gonna let this one slide. Please welcome Cassie back to the program.
Hi, Derek. I have another one for your hometown legends that I just remembered from Hollywood, California. There's the murder mansion in Los Feliz in the Hollywood Hills. I have actually been there on a little outing with some girlfriends when we went to the Murder Museum, which is also in Hollywood and should not be missed. So there is a large mansion-like house up in the Hollywood Hills. It is called the Hollywood Murder Mansion. It is at 2475 Glendower Place. And in December of 1959, a cardiologist lived there with his family and apparently had a psychotic break, took a ball-peen hammer and murdered his wife and went after his eldest daughter. She escaped, and his 2 youngest children were left unharmed. Before the police showed up, he had gone into his restroom and taken some pills and some barbiturates, possibly some acid, and laid down next to his wife. And by the time medical help arrived, he was already dead. The house was then basically auctioned off, and everything that was in it at the time of the murder stayed for over 50 years. There is pictures on the internet still of the house frozen in time that are available. I've included a few in an email for you with a link that has a full rundown of everything that went on with the families, the house, and they allowed a photographer in to catch before and after photos before they trashed out the house and tried to put it on the market. Now you can have it to your very own for a measly $4 million on Zillow currently. So I thought that was pretty awesome, and the pictures online are really great. It's an absolute time capsule, and I hope you enjoyed the story. Thanks. Bye.
You know, it might not sound like it, but $4 million would be a steal for that neighborhood. So what do you say, guys? If we all chip in just a little bit, maybe we can set up a MAU Airbnb or something. The place is absolutely beautiful. And hell, I'd live there. Ghosts or not. Now, I've linked to a listing of this house, where the description tastelessly claims this famed property is ready for its new owner to bring it to life. Poor choice of words, don't you think? Considering they call it the murder house. Well, having lived just down the hill from this place for nearly a decade, of course it was on my radar. But I don't know a lot about the property. So to explore the subject more, I present this clip from 4 years ago on behalf of my local TV station, KCAL, CBS News 9, out of Los Angeles.
It was December 1959. Police say Dr. Harold Perelson brutally killed his wife and tried to kill his teenage daughter. His two youngest woke up to the screams and were able to run away. Dr. Perelson then took acid and died. Sherry Lewis was the family babysitter. She spoke to our Stacy Butler back in 2010. She says the next year, the Enriquez family bought the house.
They never lived there. They visited the place.
Lewis says decades later, the Perelson belongings were still in the home.
There are no furnishings other than in the living room, furniture that belonged to the Perelson family.
The former neighborhood house painter describes what he saw.
Basically, it's like a crime scene that was frozen in time. You could see sheets on the ground covering things. You saw Christmas wrapping paper. There was a Christmas tree.
In 2016, the home was sold to civil rights attorney Lisa Bloom. I spoke to them over the phone.
You know, I know there was this awful tragedy one day in the 1950s, but, you know, I didn't hold that against the house.
And they want people to know most of the stories about the home are urban legends.
Most of them are not true. So, for example, there's a picture of a Christmas tree with a presents under it, and it's been there all these years, just like it was the day he was murdered. And it was a Jewish family.
And the owners are asking for $3.5 million for this home, and they're asking for cash. Reporting from Los Feliz, I'm Chris Holmstrom.
Okay, she might be right. Perhaps the family was Jewish and had no Christmas tree. But I have seen tons of footage that proves the family's belongings were left to rot in the home. At least up until recently. I believe the place is completely remodeled now. Now, I've linked to all sorts of stuff about this case over in the show notes. monstersamonguspodcast.com and click the show notes tab to learn more. And thank you again, Cassie, for sharing your hometown legend. Now, folks, if you have a tale to tell, a true tale, call our hotline at 888-608-NIGHT. That's 888-608-NIGHT. Or you can record your story on your cell phone and email the file to me at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com. Now, what's a Hometown Legends episode without a story about a supposed witch? Joe from Massachusetts. Let's hear what you've got to offer.
Hi, Derek. Hi, listeners. My name is Joe, and I've called in before with a story from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where I live, and I heard you were looking for more hometown legends, so I dug up a couple of other witch stories from the area that I thought you might be able to use. So I'm going to tell you about a pair of witches, apparently, who were sisters who lived in Cape Cod back in the 1600s. So there's Hannah Screecham, who lived off of Grand Island in Barnstable back in the 1600s, and apparently had, well, there's actually two versions of this one. So she was, you know, classic witch, hunchback, black cloak. Her laugh sounded like the shrieking of gulls. So apparently, because of just her appearance and everything, the local townspeople assumed that she was a witch, and at one point, they went out to her little cabin to bring her in, I guess, to try her as a witch. And these big black dogs appeared out of nowhere to defend her and drove the people off, at least temporarily. And then I guess a little bit later, they came back to get her. They brought her in, and mob justice kind of prevailed, and they dragged her out to a tree and hung her immediately. And according to the legend, that night, a pirate ship showed up on the shores, and they came ashore with their, you know, pistols drawn and everything, cut down her body, and walked away with it because apparently it turned out that Hannah Screecham was Captain Kidd's mother, and Captain Kidd came back to claim her body and then buried her with one of his treasure chests so that her spirit would protect his treasure. So that's one version of the story. The other version is that she was actually in league with pirates from the beginning, and all the different pirates from the area would come and find Hannah Screechum, and she would help them bury their treasure. And when they dug the pit to, put the treasure in, the captain would be there with, some unlucky other pirate from the ship. And after they dug the hole and put the treasure in, Hannah would push the unwitting accomplice into the hole, and they would be buried with the treasure as well. And then the captain would pay her and return to his ship, and the shipmates back out at sea would hear her seagull-like laughing and know that the deed had been done. So kind of cool that both stories at least have her laughing like a gull and involved in burying pirate treasure. So I really enjoyed that one. And apparently she had a sister named Sarah Screechum, and she lived over in Mashpee, which is southwest of Barnstable, if you're familiar with the Cape. And she lived in a cottage near what's now called Witch Pond, appropriately enough. And apparently it was a dense forest back in the day, and she protected it and prevented people from hunting in the forest around her cottage. So it was a very dense forest, so dense that apparently even the full moon light wouldn't shine through the trees overhead. So she protected this forest and apparently would roam the forest in either the form of a large black mare or sometimes a beautiful young doe. And apparently the hunters who would try to steal her or encroach on her land and hunt, they would sometimes come across this big mare or this doe and fire on it, and their bullets would have no effect. So scared everybody off. But when the times were lean, people would still sometimes go into her forest and, try to get some game. And apparently one such man was this handsome hunter, and Sarah fell in love with him and tried to, seduce him or whatever, but he was terrified because he knew her reputation as a witch and kept refusing her. Finally, he agreed to meet her, but it had to be outside of the forest because he was, scared of the witch. So she agrees. She leaves the forest and arrives at this man's house in the form of the huge black mare that she'd been known to appear as in her forest. And she's, playfully scampering around the man's house in the form of this big black horse. And he's apparently playing along with it at first. And, she lets him tie a bridle around her in horse form and, is going along with it at first. And then he ties her up, and then he pulls out horseshoes and a hammer. So he puts these 3 iron horseshoes on her, and apparently she doesn't make a noise, doesn't protest. And then the 4th horseshoe that he puts on her foot is a silver horseshoe. She cries out in pain. The hunter goes to get his friends and be like, hey, look, I caught the witch. But when he returns, the mare is gone. And apparently they later find Sarah Screechum with a silver horseshoe hammer to her hand. But that didn't finish her off, and apparently she kept on protecting her forest from hunters, and this particular hunter, I guess, never came back. But there was another particularly nasty winter in Massachusetts, and another hunter, desperate to, get some food for his family, goes into the woods around Witch Pond. And this time, because he had heard this story about the silver horseshoes, he brought along a silver bullet. And while he's hunting, this doe jumps out and stares him down, defiant, almost like taunting him. So sure enough, he loads up that silver bullet, fires, hits the doe right in the heart. And again, previously people had seen this doe and it seemed impervious to bullets, but apparently, just like a werewolf, she was vulnerable to the silver bullet. And they later found Sarah Screechum dead in her cottage of a gunshot wound. So those are my 2 witch stories, Hannah Screechum and Sarah Screechum from Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And I just want to say that I got a lot of this information from the book Haunted Cape Cod and the Islands by Mark Jasper and a New England folklore blog by Peter Muse. So just to give, credit where credit is due. Hope you enjoy. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks, Joe. A laugh that sounds like seagulls. What a terrifying concept. And I love the Captain Kidd connection as well, because I don't talk about pirates enough on this program. Now, for those not familiar, Captain William Kidd was a Scottish pirate in the mid to late 17th century. He was hanged in England in 1701, and he's thought to have buried treasure at Oak Island, Long Island, the Thimble Islands, the Coconut Islands. The dude loved islands. And the other version of Joe's story is very familiar to me. I've heard a million versions of that exact tale. A crazed woman on the outskirts of town, transforming into a creature at night. The only way she is discovered is because someone slipped a collar on a spectral hound, shot a skinwalking witch, or in this case, nailed a horseshoe to someone's hand. And then, when she reverts back to her human form, those injuries or modifications become blatantly obvious, giving her secret away. Now, regardless of whether I've heard similar or not, I love a good pirate story. So thank you again, Joe, for taking the time to share your local swashbuckling lore. Well, from one coast to another, this next one comes to us from Troy, up in Washington State.
Hey, Derek, my name's Troy. I'm calling from Yakima, Washington, but it's a hometown legend from Moses Lake, Washington. For a long time as a kid, there was stories among all us kids who lived down on the lake, on the water, that there was an alligator in that lake, and no one quite knows where that legend originates. We didn't really quite take it seriously, but last year I came across this book, Strange Monsters of the Pacific Northwest by Michael Newton, and lo and behold, to my surprise, I come across this. They have a chapter on lake monsters, and it has Moses Lake, Washington from 1992, where it states that on April 15th of that year, a witness, Cliff Johnson, saw a large reptile-like animal swimming near Marsh Island. The creature raised its head in a snake-like fashion. It was about the size of a human, the guy said, and it was never seen again. And the interesting thing is Marsh Island is one of the islands that I kind of lived next to. There's kind of these large marshy islands out in the middle of the lake. And last year, kind of going on the theme of weird things in the lake, my friend was out carp fishing with one of his buddies, because we have a pretty good carp fishery in that lake, and they fought something for, I think they said it was 30 minutes, and it ended up being a landlocked white sturgeon that had escaped from Fish and Wildlife captivity 15, 20 years before. So, you know, it's one of those things where you never quite know what's in your local body of water. Anyway, love the show. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Troy. Now, I'm a big fan of water monster stories as well. Nessie and Champ were two of the creatures that pulled me into cryptozoology early on in my childhood, so I was awfully excited to share Troy's entry. Now, a couple of obvious things to get out of the way here. Troy mentioned the fish known as a carp. Well, that's a good suspect to start with, because according to our research, the largest carp ever caught in the state of Washington was from Lake Moses and weighed in at a whopping 49.5 pounds. I tell you, those things can look pretty monstrous, torpedoing through the water. And Troy also mentioned a white sturgeon, the largest freshwater fish in North America. On average, they grow to be about 45 inches, but historically, they've been reported to reach 20 feet in length. So a literal lake monster, if you ask me. And running across something like that would 100% guarantee to make anyone that saw it think that something unexplained might be lurking below. Now lastly, we were able to confirm the story Troy shared about Cliff Johnson's sighting, although our sources date the experience to 1982 rather than 92. But outside of that, we didn't find a lot of information other than this confirmed sighting of what can only be described as a dinosaur-like object.
Several people have reported seeing the legendary Loch Ness Monster cruising through the waters of Moses Lake. Conspiracy theorists may be disappointed to discover that it's not the monster of legend, but another masterpiece built by Moses Lake man Mick Hansen. Mick Hansen built the Moses Lake well that was seen cruising the waters back in October. He's building these floats for a parade that will be taking place on the Saturday of Labor Day weekend.
One of the things that nobody ever sees but always imagines, I guess, is the Loch Ness Monster, and so that's why we kind of decided to go ahead and go for it. So this is just kind of help promoting it. We wanted to have the whale and then the Loch Ness Monster, and we're in the process of building the Liberty Island with the Statue of Liberty on it.
Now that thing is terrifying for all the wrong reasons. And please tell me that there's no one inside of that monstrosity. It does not look safe. Now, of course, you can hit up the show notes at monstersamonguspodcast.com to take a look. And I can tell you I'm certainly not getting in that thing. Now, from what I gather, there's only a few sightings of this supposed creature. Perhaps even only one sighting. But it is worth noting that the location of the lake is peculiar. There is a long-held belief that there is a zone, a belt, if you will, where a majority of these creatures are reported. It was likely the author and researcher Ivan T. Sanderson that first coined the notion. But it sort of checks out, because Loch Ness, Lake Champlain, Lake Okanagan, and the lesser-known creatures such as Lake Erie's Bessie, the Flathead Lake Monster, and the Columbia River's Colossal Clod, they all fall within this hypothetical belt that Sanderson observed. I believe it's around the 50th parallel. But I warn you to take all of that with a grain of salt, because there are plenty of water monster stories that don't fall within those coordinates. But not only are the creatures in this belt common and similar in description, the lakes in which they're said to inhabit are awfully similar as well. Deep, dark, and narrow. So take all that for what it's worth. And a big thanks again, Troy, for sharing your entry. Now, for another genre of legend I really enjoy, a good old treasure hunt. Hayden, from Canada. Welcome to tonight's season finale.
Hi, this is Hayden from Estevan, Saskatchewan, Canada. Guess it's not really a more ghost story or a supernatural sort of thing, but it's kind of like something for your hometown stuff, but it's more of a family legend, if anything. Well, I mean, it's somewhat true story. I believe my great-great-grandfather, he owned a farm in Montana, and he was with his family and his wife and his 5 kids, and he was out there, and he got into this argument with this guy. I don't know what it's about. I've heard 3 different versions of it. It was over an affair, over some lumber, or a land dispute. I'm not totally sure which one it was, but it ended up with my great-great-grandfather being murdered right in front of his family, so it was pretty bad. Shot several times in front of his family. The guy ran off. They went to the sheriff, rounded up a posse, tracked him down, dragged him back, and he went to court, and he was tried. The defense even said that it's impossible for my great-great-grandmother to have possibly identified him as the killer because it's too far away. So the prosecutor went to the back of the courtroom and went through an entire deck of a brand new, fresh deck of cards that was freshly shuffled right in front of everyone to see, freshly shuffled, and then she got every single one right. So the guy was convicted. He was sentenced to hang, which was then committed to life. And then the governor commuted his sentence, and then he was actually eventually formally pardoned for murdering my great-great-grandpa. So no justice there, but the guy felt guilty, left in his will to the descendants of the man he murdered a gold mine. And my great uncle was furious and called it blood money, and it was like Judas's silver, compared it to Judas's 13 pieces of silver, and threw the map into to the gold mine into the fireplace. And we have no idea where the gold mine is today. Some of my distant cousins have gone out looking for it, but no one's ever found this gold mine. So yeah, that's my lost family treasure story. Thank you. Love the show. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Hayden. What a tragic story. And sometimes it really seems like there is no justice in this world. And I guess it's been that way for a long time. But I do have a bit of advice for you, Hayden, that just might help you find this mysterious mine. If you know the murderer's name, you can look up old claim maps to discover mines that he owned at one time. Then all you have to do is trace the sale or transfer of each of those until you reach a dead end. That, likely, is your claim. Then of course you can use LiDAR scans to find the actual location of the mine itself, assuming you or your family can still gain access to it. And I'm guessing that a good part of this could be done online, believe it or not. Now, if you do find it, though, I imagine the courts would have a field day with it. There's a good chance that the property, if left unclaimed, cycled back to the county or even the state. Like I said, sometimes there's just no justice in the world. Well, I hope you or your family find it, Hayden. And if you do, I don't need any of it. But I do want to hear the story of how you found it. Thank you again for sharing that entry. Now, of course, if you ended up using my technique to find the mine, tossing me a gold bar or two might be the right thing to do. Now, folks, before we move on here, a quick reminder to visit our merchandise shop. A link can be found at our website at monstersamonguspodcast.com. We're actually retiring a few designs this coming summer, so if there's a shirt that you've had your eye on, you best get it while we still got it. Otherwise, when they're gone, they're gone. monstersamonguspodcast.com/shop. Now, I was surprised to hear this next entry, because it was sort of one of my hometown legends growing up. Spencer from Ohio. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Derek. This is Spencer from Coshocton, Ohio, a small town not too far from where you grew up. I'm calling for the hometown legends section. I've been wanting to call in. I wasn't sure which one to use, but we have this local legend about a woman named Mary Stockham. And apparently she was a witch and was murdered, and her head was cut off and hid somewhere else, you know, the standard Bloody Mary type story. But she has a grave out in the middle of the country where people like to go and party. And people claim to have seen a headless figure wandering out there. And I have a friend who says he's related to her. He won't talk about it too much, but I just find it interesting that a lot of people believe that and put a lot of stock in it around here. So that's my story, and thanks for listening, and hope you can use this. Love the show, and have a good day.
Thank you, Spencer. Not far, indeed. Literally right down the road from the tiny town that I grew up near. And I'd heard of Mary Stockham before, and I swear that I covered her here on the show before, although I can't find any of that info in my notes. So instead of diving deep on her legend, I will instead use this opportunity to share my very own hometown legend. Now, I was born in and grew up near a small town named Cambridge, Ohio. If you've taken I-70 east or west through the state, or I-77 north and south, you've been there. It's where the two major interstates connect. Well, before those major thoroughfares were developed, another national route connected Cambridge to the outside world. They called it the Main Street of America, or the National Road. Today it's widely known as U.S. Route 40. Commissioned by Thomas Jefferson himself, the National Road was cutting-edge travel for the day, connecting the eastern seaboard with the wild lands of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and lands west. And it reached our area by the mid-1820s, a narrow brick-lined road that eventually spanned from Maryland to western Illinois. A road with a ton of history and tragedy. Now, there's a place there on the old National Road just outside of Cambridge that they call Deep Cut. Now, it's aptly named because when the road was built through this area, the workers had to chisel a channel out of a large hill in order to continue on. Now, this channel was very narrow, and the walls were steep on both sides. It felt very tight to drive through. I have memories of that even as a child. Yet it was still impressive considering it was dug with picks and shovels. Well, this area is where my hometown legend originates, because the construction crew would live and camp right there along the road, and one of the workers was well known for saving his pay. Rumors were that he had it hidden in his tent, or even carried it on him at all times. Well, eventually word got out to the wrong person, and the penny pincher met his end at the end of his co-worker's blade. Legend says the poor man's head was lopped clean off. Now, the brutes tossed the head aside, took the stashed money, and buried the man's body under part of what is now the National Road. They bricked him right up, I suppose. Now, I'd heard somewhere that you can still feel the bump when you drive over it, supposedly right where the body was buried. Legend says that if you're driving through Deep Cut late at night, you can still see the murdered man's headless body stumbling in and out of the lanes, searching for his lost head. Now, sadly, I learned brushing up on this subject that Deep Cut has been regraded. I hadn't driven through there in a number of years, and it looks completely different now. Which makes me wonder, did they happen to stumble upon any bodies while they were digging? And if so, did any of them happen to be missing their head? Well, folks, this next entry is another gem that I had never heard of. Hunter from the state of Idaho. Welcome to the program.
My name is Hunter, originally from Washington, currently in Idaho, and I have a hometown legend to add to your collection from where I'm originally from. Back in central Washington, there is a ski resort named Mission Ridge. It's named Mission Ridge because in 1942, I want to say a B-52 out of either Yakima or a base on the other side of the Cascade Mountains was on a training flight as the U.S. had just recently entered World War II. Well, the story goes that this B-52, or whatever plane it happened to be, crashed into the side of around Wenatchee Mountain, I believe, and everyone died except for the tail gunner, who ended up with a propeller embedded halfway through his torso. And it is said that he roams the mountains around Mission Ridge trying to find the rest of his crew, and with a propeller sticking through his body. And there's stories of Boy Scouts being terrified by the prop man further down the mountain. And I just figured that you could dig into that, as there's a little bit of history. They recovered the wreckage of the plane from the mountain, and now, actually, at the ski resort, there is a chunk of the wing above quote-unquote bomber bowl that traditionally you go up and you give it a little love tap for some good luck and to remember the failed flight that crashed into the side of the mountain. So, thought you'd be interested to hear that little ghost story, and I hope to hear it on a Hometown Legend in the future. Thanks, and keep up the good work.
Thank you for that entry. The prop man. Now, my first thought here was this. The propeller of a B-24 bomber is huge. 11 foot 7 inches, according to a Google search. So how exactly can something that big be embedded in someone's chest? That little detail almost ruined this for me. That's until I read that it was a piece of the propeller that sheared off and was sent through the young man's abdomen. Now, Delaney did some digging, and the details surrounding the crash are factual. And she was also able to find the supposed prop man encounter, a sighting made by a Boy Scout at a nearby summer camp. The scout also sensed that something was traveling parallel to his path, at the same speed and to his right. He would stop, and whatever it was would also stop. He'd start, and whatever it was would also start. If he went faster, it would also go faster. If he slowed down, it would also slow down. By this time, he was becoming frightened and started running as fast as he could. Suddenly, he came to a right bend in the trail, and he knew he was about to face his pursuer. His heart beating and his lungs burning, he turned the corner to see something that could hardly be described as human crash out of the bushes onto the trail. 20 feet in front of him, clad in tattered army-issued coveralls, a jagged shiny metal prop projecting from his right side, barefoot, wild-eyed, shaggy hair and beard, stood what could only be the lost tail gunner of Doom Flight 22. For a moment he stood frozen in fear, looking into the haunted wild eyes of his worst nightmare. Then the specter of Flight 22 vanished into the forest. Now you can read the full report by following the link in the show notes or by visiting wenatcheeworld.com. Now this is an awesome story and an even better hometown legend, and we thank you again, Hunter, for sharing it here with us. And as tragic as the crash was, I can't help but think that the world is a better place with the prop man in it. Well, let's sneak one more call in before I have to go pay some bills. And to do so, we need to venture to the state of Colorado, where Fisher is waiting with his hometown legend.
Hey, Derek. This is Fisher from Salida, Colorado. I am calling in with the hometown legend for the season finale. As I mentioned, I live in Salida, Colorado, which is a rural mountain town, but it actually has a really, really, deep history going back to the railroads and stuff of the 1800s. And this town is about as Wild West as you could get. I walked down streets where there was cowboy gunfights every day, which is super cool, and I live in a very historic district there, which, believe me, I have my own share of stories there that I'd be happy to share at some point. But I'm just calling in to tell about Salida a little bit and the many, many hauntings that have happened in our downtown area. There's a couple key places that hauntings have occurred, allegedly. I've only seen things in one or two of the places, and then I have family members who have seen things in some of the places. There was a pizza place that I grew up eating at that my father did a mural for, and this pizza place, before it became the pizza place, was actually a funeral home. So it's where they would take deceased bodies and get them ready for funerals and burial. But my father, who was doing the painting there, would often be there late at night, and he just reported seeing some weird things. He would be the only one in the building, and he'd hear footsteps and stuff. I've also seen photos of paranormal investigators who have gone into that same building, and there's some stuff that's pretty unbelievable. And there's also, the Mountain Mail, which is across the street from this place. There's stories of hauntings that have happened upstairs there, and one time, it was late at night, me and my buddy were walking around talking about ghosts and stuff, because as you do, and we look up, and we didn't know then, but the top of the building is, to this day, sort of uninhabited. It has been refinished since. It used to be in disrepair, but has been refinished. But we saw a white glowing figure of a woman in the window of this building. But yeah, Salida's a cool, weird, old mining town turned tourist town. Definitely look into it if you have the time. Well, hey, thanks. Love what you do here, and I'd love to call in more with some other stories later. I've got some good ones. Take it easy.
Thank you, Fisher. A haunted Wild West ghost town. Where do I sign up? That's another subject right up my alley. And it sounds like something straight out of an episode of Scooby-Doo. Anyway, I've been to Colorado many, many times, but I've never really had the opportunity to explore any of its paranormal locations. Of course, not unless you count the Denver International Airport. I think I need to make my way back to that state. So thank you again, Fisher, for reminding me of that, and for sharing your area's hometown legends.
So, what I'm getting at is the front door. Where you have
tell you a story, gonna tell you a tale about something I saw in the woods, covered in hair, wore a black leather jacket, had red fingernails, it was 7 feet tall, and the answer to my prayers. I think I just met Bigfoot's sister. I think I just met Bigfoot's sister. Likes rock and roll music.
And that was Bigfoot's Sister by Michael J. Dog. It reminds me a lot of Captain Beefheart. I love it. Now you can find the Spotify link in the show notes. And if you didn't know, we like to showcase supernatural themed music on our season finales. Just our attempt to throw a little attention at the unsung heroes keeping these legends alive, musically. Now our next entry just might describe Bigfoot's sister. Josh from Oklahoma. Welcome to the show.
Alright, I got a hometown legend. Josh from Morris, Oklahoma. And our local hometown legend, I don't have much information on it yet. Hope to get more, but it's called Woolly Booger Road. And My dad used to tell me they used to go out there drinking, driving down this dirt road with their headlights off looking for the woolly booger, which nobody has ever said what it was or what it could be. To me, it's most likely Bigfoot. I did a Google map search on it, and yeah, it's totally Squatch area. But it's one I've wanted to call in for a while, but I haven't gotten around to doing any research on it, really. But the guy who started the legend was the principal of my middle school, which he's no longer with us, so I can't get a hold of him now. So it's kind of a dead-end road, but there's a lot of stories of some Squatch out in that area, and I just kind of thought it'd be a cool tale to tell. But I do have a sighting of a Squatch that took place at work around 2011, 2012. Me and like 10 to 15 other guys saw up on a hill. There was a dirt road. That dirt road couldn't have been, I don't know, 7 feet wide for a work truck to get up to, because there was a water tower on top of the hill. And we seen a dark figure at the top of the hill pacing back and forth on that street. And he was way taller than the road was wide. He had to have been at least 8 to 10 foot tall. While I was working, I had guys watching out the back door, keeping an eye on it, making sure it was still there. And yeah, he was up there for, I don't know, almost 8 hours. And it was a clear summer day on top of a good hill about Glenpool, Sapulpa, Oklahoma area, right off of Highway 51 and 81st Street. But yeah, that's what I got. Sorry I couldn't add more details, but thought I'd call it in.
Thank you, Josh. Woolly Booger Road. Unfortunately, we weren't able to find it or any lore on it, so I'm assuming this must be one of those hyper-local legends. Something only known in a small county or township. But hey, Oklahoma is well known for Sasquatch sightings. There's even a research area out there dedicated to discovering these elusive creatures. And speaking of the woolly booger, we didn't find anything about an Oklahoma woolly booger per se, but we did find an encounter from North Carolina. Now, if you're interested, I've linked to the article in the show notes. Read it in preparation for next week's episode, because we cover the North Carolina Bigfoot in part 2 of this episode. You heard that right. I have so many calls that I decided to do a part 2. So be sure to tune in next week to hear the second half of this season-ending special. But don't go away just yet. There's plenty more of this episode to go, beginning with Dave, down there in Texas.
Hey Derek, this is Gabe from Texas for Hometown Legends. Went to college in Reno, Nevada, and out of there is a kind of hometown legend about a skinwalker ranch that is actually like literally right in the middle of the city. It's called the Ferry Farms. And this is like an old family farm. Like I said, it's literally in the middle of like the north end of the airport runway is like right there. They have corn, alfalfa fields, all that stuff. They do like a pumpkin patch in the fall, like a corn maze and stuff like that. Like it's kind of a little attraction for the local area. But as legend goes, there is a woman, I believe, from the Paiute Native American tribe that was buried somewhere on that land, and she has some sort of significance. Don't know, exactly what that is. I think the significance around this woman is open to interpretation and kind of who you ask. But apparently the skinwalker on the ranch is more or less protecting that grave. Like they don't want the body exhumed or dug up or whatever. I think they found other graves on the farm throughout the years, Native American graves. The legend has it that this skinwalker is there to protect that particular burial site. And, you know, there's odd reports of seeing weird stuff out there, deer that aren't quite deer, people that run away, and when you get a better look, it's just a coyote running away, that kind of stuff. The owner of the farm has a pretty cool trail camera picture of what appears to be like a full-body apparition on one of the trails in the farm. I don't really believe in all the ghost stuff unless they quit making them back in like the 50s or something, because every ghost is described as a person from like the 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s. Like, where's all the flat brim, hoodie, bedazzled jeans, sneakers ghosts? Where are those at? But anyway, yeah, kind of a interesting hometown legend from the biggest little city in the world. Thanks, Derek. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you, Dave. How about that? Another Skinwalker Ranch-esque location. Unmarked graves, shapeshifters, not deer, skinwalkers, and apparitions. There seems to be a ton of activity at this location. And again, this is why I love doing these hometown legend episodes. You uncover all sorts of cool places that most of us have never heard of. And this is another that was not on my radar, even though I've been to Reno and flew in and out of its airport. So if what Dave says is correct, I flew right over it. Now I'm gonna try to circle back on this one in a future episode. And if you're listening and you have additional info for me, send it on in. Let's get to the bottom of the skinwalkers of Ferry Farms. Thank you again, Dave, for sharing your call. Well, I'll admit that's not a very intimidating name for a haunted farm. But hopefully this next one from Trey in Utah will better deliver on its name. Trey, welcome to the show.
Hey Derek, this is Trey from Utah. So I'm calling in with my hometown legend from Utah. So legend has it that if you were driving alone at night through Skull Valley, which is around the middle of Utah, you're going to have a really strong chance of seeing these things called the Skull Valley lights. So as you're driving through the dark and the night of Skull Valley, a car will come up behind you and start flashing their brights at you. And after so long of like flashing their brights at you from behind and so on and so forth, the car will eventually pull around you to pass. And when it gets side by side with you, you'll see that the lights are actually the eyes of a demon, and the demon will ask you to sell him your soul, which you probably shouldn't do. And I haven't driven through Skull Valley. I'd rather not. From hearing that story, I make way to actually avoid it. But what's actually sort of fun about this story is Skull Valley is close to the Dugway Proving Grounds, which has a lot of urban legends in of itself of like aliens and UFOs and other things like that. And, you know, a lot of people call it Utah's Area 51. But yeah, Skull Valley Lights, one of my favorite hometown legends from Utah. I will not make my way down there just to, you know, save my soul, but I thought it was creepy. I think it's fun, and I just wanted to call in with that. So yeah, hope you enjoy. Thanks for the show.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Dugway Proving Grounds. You know, they also call that place Area 52. And rumor is it's the real operation, whereas Area 51 is now more of a diversion than anything else. And there are some wild claims that have come out of Dugway and the surrounding area. In fact, this is what Bill Burns of UFO Hunters had to say about the base.
Dugway Proving Ground is the fourth largest military base in the U.S. and has been a home for testing chemical, biological, and radiological weapons since 1942. The base is surrounded by mountains on three sides, with heavily restricted airspace over the base reaching all the way up, even beyond the Earth's atmosphere. The area is larger than the entire state of Rhode Island and abuts the Utah Test and Training Range. Within the past 20 years, the area's runway has been retrofitted to allow the space shuttle to land. In addition to its military clients, Dugway is the home of defense contractors working on alleged black budget projects.
So, Trey, given the proximity, you're probably right. There's no telling what these lights actually are. But I'm guessing that you're a whole lot better off not finding out. Thank you again for sharing the entry. Now, folks, don't forget, if you have a story you would like to share here on the show, call our hotline at 888-608-NIGHT. That's 888-608-NIGHT. And don't forget, I'm still looking for calls from government workers. If you call one of those in, be sure to mention government workers early in the call, so I can pluck it out and bump you up to the front of the line. Now, if you were to look for a ghost, where in the United States would you start? If your answer was the oldest non-native city in the country, I think you were onto something. Patrick from Florida. Let's hear your hometown legend.
Hey Derek, this is Patrick calling from Mendocino, California. This is for the hometown legends. Recently visited my home state, Florida. The wife and I took son to a family reunion there, and we did all the Florida stuff. Took the kids to Disney with my sisters and their kids. But the first couple of nights we stayed in St. Augustine, and we ended up visiting the St. Augustine lighthouse. Prior to going there, I hadn't mentioned to my son or my nephews or anything about it being haunted or anything. I knew that. My sisters knew that. My wife knew that. But when we were there, we were going up to the top of the lighthouse, and my son got a little spooked, which isn't out of the ordinary. It was dark. It was at night. So we didn't make him go all the way to the top, comforted him because he was a little spooked out. He didn't really say about what. But then we went across the way to the lighthouse keeper's quarters, and we're looking around, doing the tour, reading all the little plaques about stuff. And we were in the basement, and my son was over in the corner looking at a plaque, and I was across the room. And he kind of comes running over to me, and he's like, "Hey, Dad, were you just talking to me?" And I was like, "No, well, what do you mean? I wasn't talking to you." And he's like, were you saying something to me? And I was like, "No." I was like, "What'd you hear?" And he said, "I heard somebody behind me going, hey, hey, hey." And I was like, "No, I didn't say that." And it was the way he was saying it, and I could tell he was spooked. And so I told him I didn't say that, but it was okay, kind of carried on the tour and finished up. And then afterwards, he also said that he saw a shadowy foot step out from a doorway, which I don't know if he actually saw that or if he was making it up. But the way he was talking about hearing the voice behind him when he was looking at the plaque was definitely, I could tell something happened the way he was telling me. At least he thought something did. And afterwards, I kind of looked up the phenomena of what usually is seen in the lighthouse, and they definitely get a lot of weird footsteps and footprints and disembodied voices. And in the basement is where they claim a lot of this stuff goes on. So it's just kind of a quick little story. It just happened recently when we went right after Christmas. We were down there. Yeah, it's a really cool lighthouse. If anybody is in the area, I highly recommend checking it out. We love lighthouses, and it's a really cool one. It's really big, but I just thought that was interesting because my son had no prior knowledge of that, and I could tell he was spooked. But anyways, thanks, Derek. Love what you do. I'll probably be calling back with a few other stories. All right, bye.
Thank you, Patrick. That's a cool area. I have a cousin that lives in St. Augustine, and I've been down there a few times. Never to the lighthouse, though. But it's certainly on my bucket list, especially after that Ghost Hunters video from some 20 years ago. I have no idea if it's real or not, but it's creepy as all get out. It's a video shooting straight up the spiral staircase. Then suddenly a dark figure leans over the top rail. Now the kicker here was that the lighthouse was supposed to be empty at the time, making this video significant. Now, I posted a link in the show notes. Go take a look for yourself. But the truth is, there are a number of spirits said to haunt the lighthouse down there. And for the local scoop, we visit this clip from WJXT News 4 out of Jacksonville.
Guests wander around these hollowed halls of the St. Augustine Lighthouse, now 148 years old. Sammy Washburn, who gives Dark of the Moon tours year-round, says there are other visitors among them, ghosts. Washburn says she's witnessed some of that paranormal activity.
He'll open and close windows when they aren't supposed to be open or closed.
That's a typical act of this shadowy figure, who Washburn says is one of the more popular ghosts. It might be a former lighthouse keeper.
People sometimes say they're struggling to climb to the top of the lighthouse, and then all of a sudden they'll feel like a hand on their back, kind of guiding them up to the top of the lighthouse.
Washburn credits that to this ghost, Maria Andrew, who is dressed in white and is one of the only ghosts she says appears in full-body apparition. Maria was the wife of a keeper of the old lighthouse who fell to his death. Then there's Peter Rasmussen, one of Washburn's favorite ghosts. He was the longest-serving lighthouse keeper, 23 years on the job in the early 1900s.
So Patrick, I'd say that there's plenty of fuel down there to infiltrate your son's nightmares. And given what I've seen and heard, he's probably right to be a little spooked. Thank you again, Patrick, for sharing your hometown legend. Now, folks, that's going to do it for this first half. For the most part, anyway. Stick around to learn how you can get more content absolutely free. But first, Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Copyright Red Crow Media. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Delaney Bowers. All media used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. Be sure to follow us on social media. Give us a like and follow at YouTube. And while you're online, please leave us a rate and review. That really helps the show grow. You can continue to catch the show every Saturday evening at 11 p.m. Eastern on the UnX digital network. Just visit unxnetwork.com to tune in. And finally, the score for tonight's episode was provided by Armchair Ambiance, Co.ag Music, and Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Be sure to tune in after the outro to learn more about bonus content. Y'all stay spooky, and I'll catch you guys next week.
Whatever. Line, I'm not.
It's a statement.
With glowing red eyes and a giant pair of wings, there comes in the chatting with reverence. Fighting over time, now light brings your silver. No unit can stop. It's engineering disaster. The sky is a nightmare. Signal of tragedy. Talking of doom or watchman. There for all to see. And you see him. Will it be tonight?
Well, if you weren't woken up already, that'll certainly do it. That was Mystery of the Mothman by the Metal Ghost. You can find a link to the full song in the show notes. Now, folks, it's time for tonight's secret entry. And I figured that we should end on one of the creepiest locales that anyone could imagine. An abandoned fun park. Eric, from parts unknown. Welcome to tonight's show.
Hi, Derek. My name is Eric, and this one is a brief hometown's legend that takes place back in my hometown of Wichita, Kansas. And it mainly pertains to an amusement park called Joyland, which operated from 1950 to about 2004, and then reopened briefly again in 2006. Yeah, so when I was in middle school, this was kind of our end-of-the-year treat. We would get to go out to Joyland and spend the day there on the two most notable things out there, which were the roller coaster and a thing called the Wacky Shack. Now, the roller coaster was a small wooden roller coaster that, honestly, it felt like it didn't pass safety regulations. It was real rickety, but it was a lot of fun for us at that age. And there was always a rumor surrounding it that someone had been killed, or multiple people had been killed on the roller coaster. And doing some Googling today, it looks like actually there was a park maintenance worker who was struck by the cars and killed. So that one actually stands true, it seems like. And so we always, back then, when I was young, there was always the rumor that it was haunted. Same with this other attraction called the Wacky Shack, which was like a homemade spooky house where you'd walk room to room. And I just had vague memories of, there was like a tinfoil room, and then the classic strobe light room, and then I think even one where they had, like bats on strings dangling around, and they would move and things like that. But that one actually also felt spooky for other reasons, not just the goofy, attraction, but it was just a spooky looking building. It was a spooky looking place. And yeah, so that's Joyland in Wichita. And if you want to look it up now, it's been closed since 2006, so it's been closed for nearly 20 years. And there's been a lot of homeless, and there's been a couple fires there, and even some groups tried to reopen it, but that never got going, never got on its feet. But yeah, I would highly encourage you or your listeners to just look up Joyland Wichita, and you'll see the now defunct Wacky Shack. I think half the letters have fallen off, so it just says Shack. And there's, piles of wood scraps, shrubs growing everywhere, and it's just kind of a creepy looking vibe. So yeah, anyway, that's a brief hometown legend I have, and big fan of the show, big fan of the podcast. Keep it up and take it easy. All right.
Thanks, Eric. Now there's a Santa Claus and Christmas themed theme park just up the road here from us. And that place sat vacant for a long, long time. Today it's all redone, and it's too expensive for me to visit. But for years, that was a creepy, creepy place. Now another abandoned and possibly haunted amusement park that comes to mind is Shawnee Lake in West Virginia. But we'll save that deep dive for another time. For now, thank you again, Eric, for the phone call. And thank you, listener, for following along thus far. Now for you folks waiting around for the Beyond, that will be a standalone episode, so look for it in your podcatcher. And for everyone that would like to join us there, visit patreon.com and search for Monsters Among Us Podcast. Join the $5 level and you'll get instant access. And you can test it all out for free for 7 days. So go ahead and give it a try. Maybe I'll see you over there. Otherwise, I'll be back here next week with the second installment. So until then, keep it spooky and have yourself a good night.